keep up the, I'm keeping up the deal.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, let me go live on YouTube. And okay. All right, welcome to the program. Charles Moskowitz, Monday through Friday, live on YouTube and subscribing stations, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. John Klezak is my guest, the Taoist professor. He has a new book out, well, not so new now, but a book out called School World Order, which basically gives an interesting insight into what he calls the technocratic globalization of corporatized education. Jake, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me back, Charles. Good to be here.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to ask, because it's a more current question, how you think the pandemic has affected American education.
Oh, well, it's basically been a good opportunity for these ed tech companies to privatize and to basically extract data from all of the students. It looks like, too, some of the students, so I also teach, I don't know if you knew that, or I don't know if you already see, but I teach at a couple community colleges. I'm an adjunct, so I bounce around. And they're talking about, they're finally floating the idea about coming back in some form, but it sounds like whatever that's going to be, whether it be hybrid, meaning half the time you're there and half the time you're online, with a mixture of totally online classes, it sounds like there's not going to be going back to the old normal, that this virtual ed tech infrastructure is going to be integrated inside the school if we ever get back to something close to full in-person learning. So it's been a great opportunity for big tech to sort of take over the public school system.
Now, when you say, I mean, in a sense, big tech involves these large private entities that are gathering data on every student and that are trying to sort of systematize and scientize education on a national level, as opposed to what we traditionally have, which is local school boards and local citizens deciding the curriculum of their schools and having that kind of control. So it's sort of a centralization of control. And it's, as you point out, and I think your book does a good job of it, it's done by private entities. They essentially they subcontract it over to groups like the Pearson organization, and who did Common Core Curriculum and critical race theory and these other things, which are run by private groups that it's very profitable to them. They get huge grants, and that they are basically running the show in terms of education, and they do so doing an end run around any consent on the part of citizens or parents.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about it is they use all this communitarian rhetoric in the meantime, and in academia, most people are pretty left of persuasion, and forever it was always corporations bad, from that socialist or Marxist perspective. Since the pandemic has come about, everybody loves big tech. Everybody loves these big corporations. I mean, if you're talking your Google, your Apple, your Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, I mean, these are some of the most horrific corporations that exist. So, I mean, if you're going to be anti-corporation, those should be some of the first on the list. And so anytime you see the pitch for we're going to use these new technologies, it's going to be community-oriented and it's going to provide equity. So it's a weird contradiction.
Right. Which is obviously the opposite. And obviously their opposition to corporations is quite situational. I mean, they're against corporations unless they own it. Unless it's like, Facebook and Google and big tech, then they're down with it, at least implicitly. They may not come out and say so. But I mean, these big means of communication, which is the definition of socialism, the public control, they're monopolistic. They tend to have interface with each other. There's a lot of intersectionality between all of these companies, and sometimes they share staff and they share CEOs, and they share data, and it is really in a de facto sense a monopoly and almost sort of a quasi government, because when you have public ownership of the means of communication, which is what socialism is, then yeah, it's private, quote unquote, but it's monopolistic, and it becomes, in the de facto sense, public. And we talked a little bit, Jake, about the problems that I'm having, and that just about anyone I know is having, in terms of censorship on the part of big tech. I've been told by many people who know how this works that my YouTube station has been shadow banned. Big companies have been shadow banned. Like, you may not agree with them, but Breitbart, they're huge. They've lost about a third of their following. And that's not an accident. It isn't all of a sudden because people don't like them anymore. It's because they've had big tech has used various means. I mean, I've had this with myself, in that I've had videos that I've done just vanish. They didn't even give me a strike. I just went to them and I found out they no longer exist. And that includes my blog site. I had about 1,500 blogs on Blogger that no longer exists. I mean, I can still see it, but it's no longer allowed online. And so, you have massive censorship. And, if people think this is good, you have to realize that your ox could be gored as well, depending upon any issue that you take, because censorship is censorship.
Yeah, I started my own media stuff recently. I'm trying to kind of get out there, and a lot of people don't read as much as they listen to audio and watch videos. So I'm trying to mix up my content instead of just writing really dense articles and books. And I noticed already that my YouTube videos, they have to be throttled, because when I put them on BitChute, the count goes up a lot faster. And it doesn't make sense, because YouTube has a larger base and has more traffic, so there's no reason why BitChute the ticker should go up faster. But then, I directly know that I've been shadow banned on Twitter. I've had several different followers get unfollowed from me, and I confirmed that they didn't unfollow me. One of them was Richie Allen Show, and then a couple other followers. Can't remember the names. They're not big media people. But I asked Richie. I said, "Hey, I don't know, if I upset you or something. Sorry, hopefully we can chat about it." He's like, "It wasn't me." He's like, "Come back on the show. We'll follow you." So
that's right. It's happened to me too. Yeah, this is exactly what's happening with me also on Twitter, and I think on YouTube, in that I've had followers who have been unfollowed without them unfollowing me. And I've contacted them, and they're like, "Well, what are you doing? I mean, I haven't heard from you in a while." And I'm like, "Well, you have to refollow." And then they just the following and the subscriptions and the likes, it just sort of disappears. It's very, very strange, and it doesn't just happen to kind of little folks like myself. This is you have senatorial candidates like Marsha Blackburn, who was the Republican nominee in Tennessee. She had all of her social network taken down 5 weeks before the election, and it took her about 2 weeks to get them to put it back up. That's a critical period of time when you're running for a public office, and she won anyway. But the point is that that's the Republican nominee. That's a main big name situation. So it can happen to anyone, and it is happening to everyone to varying degrees. Even left wingers like David Pakman has said that he's had some things taken down because he interviewed someone on the right, or he interviewed, did something. He said one little trigger word in some, and his stuff got taken down. And that's somebody who is, sort of the approved opinion, the acceptable class, if you will.
I go on both sides. I try to, make bridges, and I try to make peace and communicate with everybody. And so I've been on a lot of left-wing shows, people that identify as socialists. I went to share one of our interviews. There's a podcast called What's Left with my friend Ian Lisbon, who's also a teacher, and he was on Newsmax not too long ago because he's been taking kids out to the park and teaching them on the weekends in person on his own. And administration didn't like that. But me and him did a podcast, and Twitter would not let me share it. I forget what the message was, but it was some kind of, this link is, I don't know, dangerous.
It's right. It's unproven.
Yeah.
They do a fact check on that, unproven. They'll say, according to whom? Now we find out, for example, that the question of whether or not the pandemic virus was created in a lab, that's now allowed. Facebook has given the green light. You can now say that. But I can tell you a lot of people, including people I know, like James Perloff, for example, lost their station because they mentioned this. I mean, I had an interview with Lord Monckton from Britain, who had a lot of information about this last March of 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think that's disappeared. I think it's just gone. They didn't give me a strike, but it no longer is there. And now it's acceptable. So, the censorship can be quite arbitrary. It's like they can just decide with a flick of a mouse who gets to be heard and who doesn't, and it's not free. It's just that simple. And again, we're not talking here about subversive, dangerous things. I mean, I agree. They shouldn't allow fomenting of violence. And they do, by the way. You get Antifa and everyone else running fine on Facebook. That they should probably ban, because that's dangerous if it's a threat to public safety. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about political opinion. We're talking about social commentary. I mean, I've always, when I had a radio show, I always liked to interview people on the extremes of both left and right to find out why they think the way they do, what makes them tick, what's going on. And I did it under the assumption that my audience is smart enough to know, what's going on. I mean, it's, people can make up their own mind. I can't do that show now. There's no way. I mean, they'll just forget it. I mean, although I will tell you, like you, Jake, I mean, I have BitChute and my numbers have gone way up on BitChute. So, I've got Gab, I've got all these things. In fact, I'm building a whole network of alternative stations, and I'm listing censored programs on the same network. You can see it by going to my website, charlesmoskowitz.com. I've got links to all this stuff, and I'm building up this kind of like critical mass so that if and when YouTube takes me down or Facebook, it's going to be up elsewhere. And then I'm trying to urge people to check out the website just to get a list of places. So if they don't hear me on one and they do follow me, they'll get it on another.
Yeah, I want to ask you, how viable do you think these other platforms are going to be? Because I've noticed that BitChute acts funny too sometimes, even though it's better than YouTube. Like, I'll notice that I like to listen to David Knight pretty frequently, and he never shows up in my feed. Like other people,
you could be censoring it. I mean, I don't know. They could get finicky. And David Knight's on with, I think, dare I suggest the name, ALEXJONES.
Well, and that's the thing. He pops up on my feed. ALEX pops up, but David Knight never does, and I just find that really odd.
It is odd. Yeah, you have to go to the aforementioned. You see that he was able to create his own, his own thing outside of the cloud, and that's what you have to do. I mean, he has the money to do it. I mean, and also McGinnis is another one who's created this thing that's pretty amazing, and he's got various hosts on there. And now I just noticed this morning, because I'm discovering more every day, Mike Lindell, he's got the Frank Network up, and he's starting to put shows on there. I'm going to try to reach out and get him to carry my show. You should reach out also. And, I think that if we continue to expand, it's going to have a critical mass at some point. But I know what you mean. I mean, none of these people, we don't know, some of them might be also doing censorship. We're up against the international oligarchy, basically. I mean, what President Trump, I think, accurately called the deep state. They're socialistic, they're internationalists, They're the ones that installed the present government. Let's not go there because I'll get in trouble. And they're the ones who, decide what the rest of us lumpen proletarians get to hear and think. It's that simple. And it's not easy to kind of get around that.
So do these other platforms have their own servers then? Because I know that I remember the Parler incident where they were using Amazon. They basically got wiped out. And
well, Parler has now come back with Parler has come back with their own server. It's questionable. It's not as good. I don't know what's behind them, but I'm still there. I mean, I still have a Parler, and I still post my shows on Parler, and that's and also Telegram is a good one. Yeah, I recently. It should come out today. I joined the writing for Unlimited Hangout, Whitney Webb's Unlimited Hangout, and she uses Telegram, and we basically had a small chat. And I was like, should I even bother with YouTube? Should I say you should probably don't even. Well, I mean, I still like to post. I mean, I don't post every show on YouTube. What I'm doing is I want to keep YouTube. But if I'm going to do an interview with someone that really is going to be problematic for YouTube, I will go on YouTube briefly and say, I'm interviewing someone here that I can't interview here at YouTube. Go to these stations if you want to hear the interview. I noticed that there are a couple of people doing that. I think that, who is it? Milo Yiannopoulos does that. He's banned on YouTube. So he'll go on and he'll say, we're talking about this and that. Check this link and thank you. And that's all. That way, I mean, I suppose they may take it down anyway, but you can't be totally taken. Yeah, that's kind of the strategy I was thinking about using is I want to do not just, heavy political stuff and New World Order stuff, but, I want to do some martial arts videos and some stuff on philosophy and theology and stuff like that. maybe who knows? One day, maybe the theology, is going to be. Well, no, theology can be a very touchy issue, by the way. But you're like a good Renaissance man. I mean, you've got a lot of different interests, as you say, martial arts. You've got music. You've got all these things you're doing. So, I mean, I try to do the same. And there are some things you just have to figure out. Whether or not they're going to be appropriate. And YouTube, by the way, I mean, even though I think it's horrible, to their credit, they now will tell you, frankly, in writing, what is forbidden on YouTube. And there are several, and the big ones are you cannot discuss the election of 2020 in a way other than that Biden is the Messiah. You cannot discuss the pandemic, and you can't discuss the vaccines. Okay, get it. So we don't do that. Yeah, it was probably silly, but the third video I made was on vaccine passports, right? And so that's a no-no. That's on YouTube. You cannot discuss that issue. Naomi Wolf, by the way, did a whole expose on that. A tremendous former, still left-wing commentator, but she's on completely blowing the whistle on that. And by the way, I've heard her on with Steve Bannon's War Room Pandemic, which is still on Apple, and which is really, really good. I check it out every day. He does a tremendous job. He has real people on there, including Mike Lindell, and they talk about what's really going on. You can't do that on YouTube, though. So I'm even just saying what we said just now could trigger somebody who's going to say, adios to this. I hope not, because I haven't said anything. By the way, speaking of not saying anything, later today I have Josh Bernstein on the show, and he is in a certain area in Arizona that is looking into a certain issue that has to do with the election. We're not going to mention what, but he's there in person. And the last time he appeared on my YouTube channel with me, YouTube gave me a strike and a warning, and they took it off. But before they did, there was actually an article written about it in Newsweek, not Newsmax, Newsweek, which mentioned me by name and mentioned Josh. And so, that got some traction. Now he's coming on with me today, and I'm nervous about whether I'm going to run it on YouTube. I'm probably not going to. I might, I'll do it off of YouTube. And if I think that we kind of, he didn't say anything too horrifying for them, I'll download it. Otherwise, I might just do a video saying I just interviewed him and here it is.
Yeah, a lot of it I think is this automated algorithm. So, you know, just using the keyword, it doesn't matter the context. I think I think the only reason that the video I did on the video, the VAXX passport, didn't get deleted just because I only got 35 subscribers. I just started, so they probably feel like nobody's
right. Nobody pays.
Like,
well, that's just it. I think I've slid under the wire because nobody knows I'm here, and yeah, they've shadow banned it, so that's fine. But as I picked up some traction, all of a sudden, you know, you have the alarm bells go off. One of my videos went viral, and all of a sudden, I have this on TikTok too. One of my videos went viral. I ended up getting like 3,000 subscribers, and then they pulled it down.
yeah, it's. See, I've noticed that it can stay on there for a while before it gets deleted. I think pretty much almost every interview I've done over the last year that was on YouTube is no longer on YouTube.
Yeah,
and
I think
the most recent was not that long ago, but that was up for a long time. It got up to like 88,000 views, and maybe that was too many. I don't know.
No, I think so. I think even the interview that I did with you is gone. I don't know. I haven't checked it, but I'm sure it probably is. I mean, that's the world we're in right now. It's you know, this is not free speech. This is not any longer a situation where we have an open exchange of ideas and opinions. I mean, I've written many books. I write these short books. One of my books is called Toward Fascist America. That's what this is about. Now, Jake, I'm looking at your bookshelf and I see that you've written about Tao and you call yourself the Taoist professor. Talk a little bit. I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so it has many different meanings as to why I picked it. So one is, as I'm a martial artist, and one of my friends back in the day, there's this poem. It's a Taoist poem, and there's a picture of an artist depiction of a Taoist priest in this the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. That was Bruce Lee's one of his fighting manuals, or it's his philosophy of fighting. He had his fighting methods, was other books, but it's his philosophy of, you know, proto mixed martial arts. And so my friend used to say, so you're the Taoist professor, you're the Taoist priest, man, you're the Taoist priest. And so I always thought that was cute. And then I also used it though because you know, I have studied the I Ching quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you know, that's not Taoism, but I've dabbled in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu. But then actually I'm Christian, and this is actually a book by
I see that, Christ and Tao.
Yeah, the Eternal Tao. That's by an Orthodox scholar, Orthodox Christian scholar. And I know you've had E. Michael Jones on it.
Oh yeah, a couple of times.
He talks a lot about the Logos in John 1:1, right?
Yeah,
so
he does.
The Logos in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos is with God, and the Logos was God. Well, as he explains very well, right? The English interpretation, which uses word, doesn't actually capture, because we don't have an English word that represents Logos, right? The Greeks actually have, like, they have a different term for the grammatical concept of a word as a symbol, which is rima. But they don't use that. They use Logos because it encompasses speech, rationality, measurement, grounding, all this type of stuff. It's the root of logic. So if you go to the East, when they translate John 1:1 in the East, in Chinese, they say in the beginning was the Tao, because the Tao is actually very comparable to the Logos. And actually they were conceived around about the same time. So about 500 BC,
sure.
You got Heraclitus over in the West, and you've got Lao Tzu over in the East, which is just an interesting kind of synchronicity. But you know, so for me, it's a way to sort of talk to everybody, and to also, you know, talk martial arts, talk to people of an Eastern perspective, talk to people of a Western perspective, talk about metaphysics, talk about God, talk about natural law. You know, and just as a side issue, you know, Logos and its various expressions in the West. So you have things sort of that grow out of that, like Plato's Great Chain of Being, and then later Aristotle's Historia Animalia. But it's this idea of the categories of nature in a coherent hierarchy or a coherent tapestry. And if you look at in the I Ching, which again is not Taoist, but there are corollaries. They have that yin yang symbol, which is the
right, the double, the circle with the
right, and then it actually has. You ever see what they're called trigrams that go around it? There's 8 of them. And they're broken lines and solid lines. So broken line is yin, which making it's passive. They would say feminine. Today that would really get mad, right? And then yang would be active and bright, and and you can associate things that. So you would combine those into the 4 directions of heaven, and then after that, those 4 directions of heaven get combined into the 8 elements, which are trigrams. And so around that idea of, right, which is in I Ching is often used to symbolize or in correlation with Taoist philosophy. It's this idea that that force of the Tao, which holds all of nature together, is expressed in these different elements. And I see, and it's basically, you can see it as an Eastern parallel to the Great Chain of Being and just that whole conception. So to me, I like to do some comparative philosophy or comparative religion there to sort of show that, right, this metaphysical idea is, it's not just, right, the West, right? It's in nature, it's in the universe. You would say it's from God, right?
Right. No, I mean, I also look at it from a Jewish perspective in that the book of Genesis, what Jews call the Torah, what Christians call the Old Testament, when God breathed the Spirit into Adam and Eve, when he created Adam, the Hebrew word for that is a Shekinah, and that when the Hebrew text was translated into Greek by the Septuagint, the word Shekinah was translated into the word Logos, and that's where St. John, who wrote the Gospel, got the idea of Logos, both from the Greeks and also from the Septuagint, and that the idea of the wind being breathed into Adam to give him a soul and to give him reason is what separated man and women from all other beings, and that it was the ability to reason and to perceive the nature of the universe to a degree we can as imperfect beings. We're not God, we can't know everything, but we can know a lot, and we can begin to develop a civilization based on reason. So the idea of Logos, I think, is Western, but it's also Eastern, and I think that you'll find it in probably every culture. The Hopi Native Americans have a concept like this as well. It's this idea that there is a rational universe that was created by some divine event, what we call God, and that God basically separated himself or herself or whatever, it's a genderless God, from the creation, and that the creation was set up in a way that by man's existence we can perceive the nature of that universe, and that's called Logos. It's called reason, and build a rational and moral society based on that perception. So, I mean, it's just an interesting concept, and I think that Christianity obviously introduced it to the world in a more uniform way, certainly, than Judaism did. But great stuff, really interesting.
Can I ask you a question about, because I've actually been looking at the Septuagint and been having some theological discussions with a friend of mine about, right, the deity of Christ. And so we're looking at the term proskuneo in the Greek, which is translated sometimes as worship, but literally it would be to bow down. And I believe that the Hebrew would be shaka. Am I saying it right? To bow down before, like.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not a scholar on that, but I mean, I can just tell you that as a Jew and as the one of the basic principles of the Torah is that the children of Israel, that all mankind really should not bow down to anyone but God. And there's a little scene in the book of Esther, which where Mordecai is asked, because the Ahasuerus, the king of Persia, said everyone has to bow down to Haman, the villain of the story, right? Because Haman was such a great guy, and then you'd have to kiss his ring, and every citizen, whenever he'd pass, you'd have to bow to him. And when he got to Mordecai in the village, in the city, Mordecai refused to bow down to him. And he's like, well, what the hell is the matter with you? Why aren't you bowing down to me? And he said, because I'm a Jew, and because we only bow down to God, no one else. Everything else is idol worship. And that's what triggered all the events that led to that incredible story. And that the idea is that to worship anything other than the King of the universe, the creator of all things, the giver of the law, is idol worship. It's worshiping false images. It's worshiping, it's basically worshiping man as opposed to God or man-made things. So I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but it sounds to me like it is.
It is. But then there's parts like where Abraham encounters the Hittites, and it says that he bowed down. And so some of the people I was talking to saying like, well, you can bow down as a sign of respect, but not worship.
Right.
But from what I was able to gather, and I'm not a scholar in Greek or Hebrew, I'm trying to cross-reference and do my best. It seems like that is the term that's used. Like there's no Hebrew equivalent of the word worship when it's usually it's expressed as that term to bow down. So I was trying to work out how that works. But
no, I don't know the answer, but I think he was probably bowing down as the equivalent of like a handshake. Abraham basically conducted the world's first real estate transaction with the Hittite king when he purchased the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. And Hebron, by the way, means friendship. And it's one of the world's oldest inhabited cities. It's still there. That cave is still there. It's venerated in both Judaism and Islam. And it was the burial plot for Abraham and his wife and his son Isaac and his wife and his grandchildren. And the transaction was done very publicly. You had the Hittites come out, the Israelites come out. They had a huge barbecue. They had a big party. There's probably a bow, maybe a handshake. There was a formal exchange of money for the property. Abraham paid the Hittite king an agreed upon amount of silver. And then the king signed over the property to Abraham. And there was a lot of ceremony around it. And in a way, it was the establishment of private property, right? He owned it after that in the name of his tribe, but it began the process of deeds and of property and of all that stuff and all the rights. So I think that might be the reference to the Hittites, because it was the Hittite king that Abraham met with, and they had it was a treaty, and it was an agreement, and it was very public. They wanted everyone to see it so that there wouldn't be any question about it.
And when they would enter into a covenant contract, as you said, there's a lot of ceremony involved, and I might be mixing it up, but I know that in one of the covenants that Abraham makes with somebody else, that they have a ceremony where they cut the calf or a sacrificial animal, and then they walk through the middle of it, right? And so I guess what I'm asking is that even those basic property contracts, was it usually done in the context of some sort of a spiritual, or right, when you talk about the ceremony or the ritual, was it done under the umbrella of understanding that there would be divine repercussions if the covenant was broken? Or am I
No, I think there is that element to it. There were agreements that were arrived at between between men usually, and that they were formal agreements. But yeah, I mean, it was seen possibly as, the divine covenant, that's something else.
Sure.
That's like at Sinai, God gave the Torah, and then there was a agreement that the children of Israel would take on these extra responsibilities, these extra observances, so that they could be closer to God, they could know God, and as such they could be an example, a priestly sect, to shine a light to the rest of the world about hopefully bringing the entire world closer to God. Those are covenants. Jesus represents a covenant, right? I mean, David had a covenant. I mean, there were certain covenants. There were certain moments where there's a covenant between God and man. I think those are very different and those are very special. I think that there are also covenants between people, like between Abraham and the Hittites. That was not, God wasn't there. He was there, but God, it was between two men who were both leaders of their tribes, and it began the establishment of the nation state. Also,
I guess the reason why I'm asking that is because when I try to pin down, this is what the word means, and then it's like, well, in this context, it could mean, and so I guess I'm wondering if that gray area in my ability to interpret at this point, that maybe that's because that even in a worldly covenant, that it would mirror, or at least it would look maybe in ceremony or in gesture, might have some of the elements of what would be deemed only for a covenant with God and the divine. It's just a thought.
I don't know. I mean, look the United States and Great Britain signed the Treaty of Paris ending the American Revolution. I mean, that's a treaty that each side formally looked at, agreed to conditions, and they both entered into it. And there is, I suppose, a sacred element to it because, it's a matter of trust and it's a matter of honor. And it's done in public, and everyone supposedly knows what's in the treaty. That may not be true today, but there's all these secret codicils now, which is not good. But
Well, I think what you're pointing out too, though, is that two people can sign a contract, and the only thing that actually holds that contract there is the two people abiding by the contract. Well, that requires you to have a moral compass, and where does that morality come from? I mean, you could pragmatically file the contract, but if it's just about, pragmatism and getting what you want or need, right, then you might find ways to find loopholes or break it. So if you're going to honor it entirely, it really goes to the moral law, which is the law that comes from God.
And it comes from a society based on logos, that there's an order of the universe. There's an order that man is able to create an orderly society using abstract concepts. And that man is not perfect. We're not going to ever have a utopia, but we try to develop a system by which we can have agreements and mitigate conflicts. That's why in Sinai, Moses was told by Jethro, his father-in-law, the Midianite, to set up a separate group of elders to take the burden of rule off of him and to make judgments in conflicts between people. You're getting a divorce, or you're getting, a property fight, or you're getting, bankruptcy, or all these other things that come up in life. You would have this council of elders who would operate separate from the government and who would adjudicate and try to come up with some sort of a solution that would be not perfect, but at least you'd bring some sense of justice to each side. In fact, the Noahide covenant has that as one of its principles, that the nation states of the world need to set up a separate entity. That's what our Supreme Court is supposed to be. It's part of our balance of powers. We're supposed to have separate entities that are independent, that are not controlled by the government, and that can render justice based on evidence and based on a legal process, due process.
And so, if I recall, it's either Chronicles, the Book of Chronicles, or Book of Kings, right? When the Israelites wanted to have a king, right? They're like, we want to have a king like the other nations.
Yes.
And God is like, well, I'm your king. You don't need that. And he lets them have a king, but the priesthood was still separate, and the priesthood could tell the king, you're messing up. You shouldn't be doing this, and it was not this. Right. And so I guess that's right. The first separation of church and state, kind of. Right?
No, that's right. I mean, it was a good, first of all, the early Israelite tribes, the 10 tribes, the 12 tribes, they formed a loose confederation of independent states, basically. And in the book of Deuteronomy, it shows the exact borders of those states, and that they would kind of be they would have a general adherence, but it would be, it would be like the United States was modeled after that. I mean, Benjamin Franklin understood that. The Iroquois tribe also was like that. They had a loose confederation of Indian tribes that formed like a central government that would only do certain things, and that each of the states or each of the tribes would have its own sovereignty within that entity. And then you had people come to Samuel the prophet and say, we want a king, just like all the other nations. We don't want to have to deal with all the uncertainties of having independence. And it's never certain. It's always imperfect. And Samuel responded with a speech that is really classic. And it's in the Torah, it's in the Tanakh, it's in the prayer, it's in the writings, where he says, if you have a king, he's going to enslave your sons and send them off to war. He's going to prostitute your daughters, and they'll all become whores. You're going to have this. You're going to have that. He goes into all the. He's going to assert, kind of usurp your powers. And so, it's a good warning to all of us right now that there's a corrupting element in a centralized power with a centralized executive. There's always going to be that, even in a limited situation like the United States, where you have an executive who has to answer to all the other branches of government. It's still, the founding fathers understood that. That's why they set up this incredible system. You can't have all the power reside in the hands of one clique. And, and to get back to what we were talking about, Jake, that's what we're worried about now with, this kind of world order. Your book is called School World Order. I would say New World Order, that is now at a very serious critical mass of danger because of technology, because of science. You now have big tech controlling the means of communication all over the world. You've got artificial intelligence. You've got transhumanism. You've got all of these sciences that, the development of robots that can't be controlled. You've got all of these sciences, which in and of themselves are great. But when they're in the hands of this centralized authority, whether it be literal de facto or whether it be less formal, and I think in this case it's less formal, it's a great danger to freedom. It's a great danger to independence, which is the natural condition of man. So
it's basically a modern Tower of Babel. Everybody can communicate through these platforms, and you can even translate other languages with the click of a button. And, what was the goal of the Tower of Babel? Is they basically were trying to take over heaven. In other words, they wanted to be God. They wanted to be their own God. Talk about transhumanism. This is literally what most of them talk about. So you have someone like Ray Kurzweil, who's used delusions to God, who will become more God-like.
Yes.
You had the people at Google, I want to say Sergey Brin or Larry Page or both, said that they wanted Google to be the mind of God. You've got a book here called Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, which means God-man, man God. And it's all about transhumanism. And then you've got the Way of the Future, a Church of Artificial Intelligence. And I think that's, by the way, a cute little play on WTF, because when they invert the truth, they like to use potty language. And then you also have there was one more. The Sophia robot, which is basically an allusion to the goddess of wisdom. So they always use this religious imagery, and the idea here is that through technology, they can rewrite the fabric of reality that God created. They can rewrite your genetics. They can rewrite your neurological system. They can rewrite your communication system, and basically you can create the world in your own image.
Right. You can use science to engineer the nature of humanity. And you mentioned Ray Kurzweil. He has the Kurzweil Institute at MIT. When he started out, it was incredible, brilliant ideas, a great, brilliant man. He developed what's called the talking book, and he did it for Stevie Wonder. It would read a book. You'd put the book in it, and it would turn it into an audio. Incredible invention. This was back in the 1980s. But since then, he's gone on. I interviewed one of the people at that institute, and talk about cult-like. The guy had like buggy eyes, was like just really like a believer. And they based on the theories of Darwin, which are questionable. I don't want to go into that too much. They believe that they can evolve a new species of man, and that species would have computer components, that would work with flesh, and that the man would have cosmic consciousness, would have life to 200 years old, would have perfect features, would have super strength. Sounds to me like the Ubermensch of the Nazi era, frankly, and it is. It's this utopian idea of creating a more perfect species of man. And that they really are, they mean business. I mean, they're working on this. Now, maybe there are certain elements of it that could be helpful. I mean, if you find a way to check whether you have cancer, fine. Diseases, things that can, we're obligated as images of God to try to improve life on earth and to try to improve health and longevity. The Torah says, live long and be fruitful. These things are all good because they lead to more independence and more freedom, but they have a different agenda in mind here. They want to create a super race that's going to control the world and decide who lives and dies. I mean, I'm sorry, I might get in trouble with YouTube for saying that. I don't know. And there's some other things I might say, but let's just, I'll leave it at that.
Can I wax on that a little bit?
Yeah, please.
So, a couple of things. So you're right. Like in my book, I look at even with the brain-computer interfaces, which they already have some more, I don't want to say crude, but less sophisticated versions that can be used to help people with like epilepsy and Parkinson's. So if they've got these interfaces where if you're getting ready to have an epileptic seizure, that you can swipe this button and it sends a countervailing electrical
that's
signal
fantastic.
that balances it out, right?
Sure.
And so I had a friend who's no longer with us, and he had seizures all the time. I would never tell him don't plug that thing in and make yourself healthier. But as you mentioned, there is an ulterior motive here, and what I think you can see it with some of the word we can't say about the new treatment for the situation we're all in right now. But there's a book by I'm sure you're familiar with it, Edwin Black, right? War Against the Weak. He's got two, IBM and the
Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff.
Well, those are the two main books he did on eugenics. And War Against the Weak, as the title suggests, was all about, right? Eugenics was all about getting rid of the so-called inferior or unfit gene pools through sterilization, abortion, euthanasia, etc. And what they're basically doing now, because as you mentioned, transhumanism is the second step in eugenics. And Julian Huxley, who was president of British Eugenics Society, he pushed for eugenics when he was head of UNESCO, the first director general. He coins the term transhumanism in a book called New Bottles for New Wine, which is a biblical allusion that he's inverting, right? So it goes back to the religious imagery. And you talked about how Julian Huxley, I think it's a book called What Dare I Think, but he was very...
He was. And also his manual for UNESCO says a lot about what he had in mind.
Yeah, and he knew that you couldn't get rid of the religious part of the mind, the spiritual part of psychology. So they had to come up with basically find something to do with that part of the brain and make a new religion. But basically what they're doing now with the transhumanist movement, the neo-eugenic movement, is instead of a war against the weak, they just flip the rhetoric and they say, oh, we're going to help you. We're not going to just eliminate the so-called undesirables. We'll fix the so-called undesirables by tinkering with their genes, by plugging them into computers, by giving them this little, I don't want to use the word, but our little device they want us to carry around to prove that we're healthy, right? And so, and which is a blockchain system that, as Naomi Wolf says, can be hooked up to a myriad of other devices.
She refers to it as the complete end of freedom, and it is. If we go that way, it'll be over, kaput. I mean, we'll have to get back, and ultimately we'll win, but it'll be a huge setback for individual freedom in this world.
Yeah, it has to be resisted 1,000%.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm ready to not. Like when they tell me, I've been waiting for it. I haven't been extra vocal. They don't, most people.
Let's be careful here, Jake, because we don't want to get banned. We have to, I think that we probably have said enough about it. People can check both you and I out off of YouTube to get more information if you want. It's harder and harder to get information, but it's out there. By the way, speaking of which, I've written many books, and I used to use Wikipedia, not so much the content, but the footnotes. And Wikipedia has become completely captured by the internationalist oligarchs. It's completely censored. It is they've taken down probably about 20% of it, and the rest of it has been rewritten. I don't know who's behind that, but that is not reliable. It's a fortunately I studied this stuff before Wikipedia went bad, went on the dark side. But it's younger people coming up, they're not going to get information that is truthful and balanced. And I could just say that to younger people listening to this program, because people my age, they know that what's going on. Just try to use your own mind, keep an open mind, don't believe everything, look into it. You can get to truths. It may not be easy, but it can be done. And once you get to truths, it takes courage to stand up and reveal them and discuss them. And there may be settings where you should not, but just, use discernment and use judgment, because we can all contribute to freedom in some way, given our realities, given our situation. I mean, it's easy for me to say, I'm this old guy sitting here doing a podcast, but if I was a college student trying to get a degree and trying to get a career, you have to be careful. You could end up going on the wrong side of the bias police. Police, colleges have set up, these anti-bias police, literally. I got in trouble with it, and I don't care because I'm not a student. When I was doing my broadcast at Tufts University, they have like a radio station where they allow regular citizens to come in and have a show. And so I went in and I had a show, and somebody dropped a dime on it. I said something that someone didn't like, and I got a call from the bias police, and I got a very nasty article written about me in the school paper. And then they relegated my time to like 4:00 in the morning. Now, for me, it's no big deal because, I'm not worried about graduation. I'm not worried about a career in or anything. But if you're a kid in this college and your parents are spending 60, 70 grand a year, and you want to have a future and you're trying to get a degree, that sends a message. You keep your head low. And I think a lot of younger people, they go into it and they just subsume any slightly subversive thinking, and they just go along to get along because it's easy and because you need to. And, there are rewards for doing so. And they can see that once in a while, someone who doesn't is punished with these kind of attacks like I had at Tufts, because that could have been them. Someone could drop a dime on them. They might have said something that was seen as politically incorrect.
Yeah, I have an interesting story about, my journey through college. And, sometimes I think maybe God was like, he was holding on. He waited to show me something until I got to the end of my master's program, or basically in the middle of it, to really kind of open my eyes, because I don't think they paid me to do my master's because they loved me so much in my undergrad, because at the time Bush was in power and I didn't really know much about politics, but you get thoroughly saturated with Marxist ideas. But I'm looking at this Bush guy who's supposedly this capitalist, and I'm like, well, this Iraq war stuff is no good, and this 9/11, this security state is no good. So this Marxist stuff is the opposite of that. Okay, yeah, I'm that. That's cool. I want to be the opposite of that. And then when Obama got in and was doing the exact same thing, I would go to the professors and say, yeah, Obama is, and they looked at me like, no, it's good when he does it. It's okay because he's on our team. And it was bizarre. And that's when I really started looking at, what I guess they call conspiracy theory, libertarian stuff, and all that type of stuff. And I just noticed relatively quickly that people who would be, eyes would light up to see me, they would walk past me in the hall, would not look at me. So it wasn't so bad where they could ban me or get rid of me, but they treated me very differently. Not all of them. I don't want to say that. There's a lot of professors that I still keep in touch with today. And I probably was a little more, to your point, I probably was a little more vocal and probably aggressive with providing rebuttals to every discussion that they were probably didn't make class easy for them to manage from my perspective as a teacher. So as you know, right, everybody doesn't have to know everything, especially if they're not receptive all the time. So you can I always like to broach subjects as questions like, hey, have you heard about, or my friend says, and if they have a really emotional reaction, just
back off. Yeah.
If they're open to it, and you have someone to talk to, but there's no reason to beat your head against a brick wall trying to talk to people who are ideological.
And always be kind and be polite, and yes, don't waste your time with futile conversations with people that are not going to be convinced of anything. I mean, but yeah, you've dealt with some of this, obviously, Jake. And I want to wrap it up because I have to keep my shows under an hour because BitChute and Gab and Brand New Tube and all these other guys I'm doing, they generally don't let me download a show that's over an hour. But I just want to make a quick observation. You mentioned Karl Marx and the Marxist thing. I've written several books about this, and I actually am thinking as I examine Marx and his ideas, that Marx got it half right. He really did. There is a ruling class in the world. They're not necessarily rich either, but they're powerful, and that they have intersecting alliances all over the world, and that they have one way of doing things, and they are benefiting themselves. And it includes people at the top levels of finance, but also the top levels of politics and business and academia and even religion and other areas. And that they do seek to consolidate power. They do seek to rip us off. Marx is right about that. The problem was that the second half of Marx was completely wrong in that his solution to the problem was to give them the biggest gift of all, which was to completely end individual freedom, to end all the institutions that make us free, such as belief in God, have a belief in family, individuality, the right to trade goods and services, the right to have sovereign nation states and local control, and all of the things that make us free. He wanted to abolish all of that and basically hand the whole thing over, the whole enchilada over to this ruling class, so that there would be this one world ant colony. So, it's I'm halfway there with him, but then I take a complete 180-degree turn the other way. So anyways, talk about, because we got to wrap it up, where can people get your books, Jake, and let people know where they can get more information about you and your work?
You can go to my website at schoolworldorder.info, and there's links to Trying Day books where you can buy my book. I recently spent 30 days with my mentor, Charlotte Thompson Iserby.
Oh, great.
Coming down from America. She wrote the foreword to my book. I stayed 30 days with her in October. I stayed another few weeks with her back in March. And I went through she gave me access to all her archives. I've got tons of stuff.
Oh, she's great. I've interviewed her. She's a former Reagan official, Department of Education whistleblower who really blew the whistle on this whole rotten outcome-based education and this whole agenda of commoditizing education and students. She's a great figure. That's good.
Yeah, she kept everything that she took out of the department, including like memorandums. And so I've got literally it's a stack that's wider than me and as tall as me. I'm putting it on a database.
Oh, that's excellent.
It's on my website. I got a little paywall on it, just $5 a month for all sorts of stuff, and I'm going to, be uploading stuff all the time. So
good
documents and notes. And then today should go up at Unlimited Hangout, an article I wrote based on a bunch of the documents I dug up. So you can
that's amazing.
Yeah,
send me a link to it, Jake, so I could put it up on my station, because that's good, important stuff. That's really amazing. That gets to the guts of what we're talking about.
Yes, sir. I will do. I appreciate it.
All right, Jake. Listen, thanks so much for joining me as always. We'll talk to you soon, and let's do another show in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. All right.
All right. Take care.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.